Welcome back to another episode of Pulpit to the Pew. I'm your host, Brother Sean Brumfield, and we are continuing part 2 with Brother Carlos Frazier.
How's it going?
And we got Brother Jonathan Mitchell back with us here.
How's it going, everybody?
So where we left off was Brother Carlos had just got done sharing with us how he got moved into Bethel Chapel as pastor. And
Bethel Chapel in Richmond, Indiana.
Yes.
Not to be confused with Bethel Chapel in Granite City, Illinois.
There's also one in Carlisle, too, I think. It's Bethel something.
Yeah. Well,
Bethel Church or something.
It's Brother Caggs.
Yeah, Brother Caggs. There's a lot of them. Like even in Georgia, I think I've seen one that was like,
and it created some confusion because I went to Bethel Chapel in Richmond right after Brother Brim announced that he was resigning from Bethel Chapel in Granite City. And there were people legitimately confused that I was going to go pastor where Brother David Brim has been. And while we were at Bristow, actually had somebody come up to me and said, man, I had somebody congratulating me on our new pastor that you were going to come be our pastor. It was somebody from Granite City. And we both laughed about it. And I told him, I said, man, I wouldn't want to follow David Brim anyway.
That'd be some big shoes to
Huge
fill,
shoes.
Man.
Yeah.
You know? But we were talking about how immediately stepping into pastorship, you had come across a rather massive trial, in my opinion. I would say it was.
I won't argue with you.
Yeah.
I mean,
I'm just taking from the perspective on the outside looking in. I don't know.
It seems pretty massive from my perspective as well.
And still dealing with some aspects of it. So I will say to everyone listening, I do appreciate prayers. I appreciate everybody that has prayed for me, but I do ask, keep praying, because the Lord's brought me a mighty long way, and we'll talk about that. But I do have a little bit further to go, but we're trusting God. But yeah, started pastoring May 18th, and then the weekend of July 4th, my life kind of spiraled out of control for a second. So we had gone to Oklahoma for my sister-in-law's birthday party. She was turning 40, so they were going to have, a big birthday party for her out there. My in-laws live out there. She doesn't, but, her and my wife's parents and brothers, and all their extended family pretty much are all out in Oklahoma. So she wanted to have a birthday party out in Oklahoma. We wanted to go, to celebrate with her. So, even though we hadn't been at the church very long, went ahead and got somebody to fill in for me on Wednesday night, somebody that, I trust, that, would do all right, that I wasn't going to worry about, blowing the church up right after I take it, So, and then we were just going to be gone, like Monday through Friday and just drive back on Saturday. So I wasn't missing a weekend or anything like that. But then Sunday before we left, I just noticed my ear was a little bit sore when I messed with it. That feeling, like when you get out of the shower and you go to, pull the moisture out of your ear, you stick your finger in there, and you make that little vacuum thing. That was sore. When I'd stick my finger in my ear and just kind of pull, and that little vacuum would kind of hurt a little bit. Like nothing excruciating, but it was like, oh, I noticed that, and it doesn't usually feel like that.
The doctor says there's a little pressure there.
Yeah. And so, like, it wasn't even anything sharp or anything like that. It was just like, huh. And I was like, I hope I'm not getting an ear infection, but I've never had one, but I kind of wonder if I'm getting one, and so that's kind of, that kind of went on all day Sunday. Monday, we get in the car early in the morning to head to Oklahoma. We're in the car all day long, and it's late evening by the time we get to my in-laws' house. But I would say like the last few hours that we were on the road, it was, every so often, every 10, 15 minutes or something like that, I would get like a shooting pain in my ear, like a random stabbing shooting pain deep in my ear, which at that point I'm like, okay, yeah, I've definitely got an ear infection. So, Tuesday morning I get up, and with our insurance, I can do like a telehealth call, and I end up on like a video chat with an urgent care doctor. And so I did that, explained my symptoms, thinking, okay, he's going to give me an antibiotic. Sure enough, he did, based on what I was describing. He's like, yeah, sounds like you got an ear infection. We'll get you an antibiotic. So I start antibiotics on Tuesday, take them Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Thursday night, couldn't hardly sleep because it was keeping me awake. My ear was hurting so bad, which generally after 2-3 days of antibiotics, at least from what I understand, and I'm not going off of experience, but from what I understand, 2-3 days on antibiotics with a normal ear infection, you should be pretty good at that point.
You start feeling better.
Yeah, at least somewhat better, if not entirely better, certainly not worse. And I was just getting worse. And so Thursday night, I'm tossing and turning in bed. I'm praying, asking God to please help me. Friday morning, get up, and I'm hurting so bad. I tell my wife, I'm like, I need to go to an urgent care so somebody can actually physically look at my ear because I'm getting worse, not better. So something's not right. Go to the urgent care. He looks at my ear and weird. He says, well, it doesn't look too infected, but it is a little red. I'm like, what do you mean it doesn't look too infected? Like, I feel like I'm dying over here, man. I'm in serious pain. And he's like, it is red. He goes, but we'll go ahead and we'll up your prescription. And this is early Friday morning, so it was in time that I could take 2 doses of the antibiotic on Friday. So they gave me an even stronger antibiotic than what I'd been on, which I hadn't been on a weak one to begin with. But he upped it, to something he felt like was stronger. Took that Friday morning, Friday evening, go to bed Friday night, and I wake up at like 2 a.m. Saturday morning, and I'm in just horrible pain. Like if I was going to put it on a 1 to 10, I would say like a 9.5.
Yeah.
That I was miserable. So I was hurting bad enough. I woke Regina up and I told her, I was like, baby, you got to take me to the hospital. I was like, I need an emergency room at this point. I'm hurting so bad, especially, after several days on antibiotics. And now I've had a full day of an even stronger antibiotic. And I'm not only getting worse, I'm at the point where it's just horrible, miserable. And so she took me to the emergency room that night. The wee hours of the morning, and so they gave me, a shot in the hip, of some pretty strong painkillers to, get me kind of leveled off. And he told me it was the strongest stuff they had. He, stronger than it was Dilaudid.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So he gave me a shot of Dilaudid. So I was good for a few hours after that, but they gave me an even stronger antibiotic and they gave me a painkiller prescription for hydrocodone, and so they gave me a prescription for that. So they said that way you've got painkiller to keep your pain at bay while the antibiotic, has time to work. That way you're not suffering at home while you're taking these antibiotics. Okay. So they send me home. We get home at like 5:30, 6 a.m, something like that. So go straight to bed. And I woke up at like 9 o'clock, which is when the pharmacy opened. We had to wait until the pharmacy opened up before I can even fill my prescriptions. But I woke up at 9 when they opened, and I was just in horrible pain again. It was already back up to like an 8.5, 9. And so I told Regina, I was like, you've got to go get my prescription filled. I'm dying here. Mm-hmm. So she goes, she gets it, brings it back. I take the pain medicine. It takes me down to like a 6.5, 7, to barely even took the edge off. I was still hurting bad, even on the hydrocodone, and it made me sick as a dog, man.
Yeah.
And, when you're suffering through stuff like that, it can be easy to just think of nothing but this. All I can think about is my pain. All I can think about is I want this pain to be over. All I want is to be better. It consumes your mind. And going through stuff like that, man, it's easy. We talked a little bit last week about discouragement. That's where discouragement comes in. When you're going through stuff like that, and it feels like things like that can just be forever, especially when you're doing everything to do to get better, and it's just not working. You're like, they gave me the antibiotic. I'm taking the antibiotic. It's not working. They gave me the pain medication. I take the pain medication. It's not working. It's so like, it's discouraging, man, when you're in a situation like that, in which I realize what I'm talking about here is over the course of a few days. There's people out there, man, that have been going through the same pain, the same problem, day in, day out, day in and day out for years. So like, imagine that kind of a discouragement, man. But like, this was acute stuff. Like, I wasn't just, dealing with some aches. Like, this was bad stuff. Like, I'll confess this to you. I cried tears.
Yeah.
I can't think of a time in my adult life that I have ever cried tears over pain. And I can't think of a time in my adult or teenage life that I ever cried tears over pain. I've hurt. Like, I mean, just over the past few years, like I tore my ACL, had major knee surgery. Like, I know what pain feels like, but I never cried over it. But like sitting in the parking lot while my wife went in. So like Friday morning when we left that urgent care and they gave us the stronger antibiotic, we drove from there straight to Walmart for my wife to go in and get the new antibiotic. And while she's inside getting the antibiotic, I'm sitting in the van out in the parking lot and just start praying, asking God to help me. And like, I just broke down in tears, like tears streaming down my face as I'm crying out, God, please help me. God, please help me. Because I was just hurting so bad.
Yeah.
You know, and so if that gives you any indication, never cried over pain in my life.
Well, when they said that you had went to the doctor as consistently as you had, I was like, something's wrong. Cause like, I mean, we've done a ton of projects together, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I was going to Sharonville for 6 years out of year 8. So, I mean, we went together quite some time there,
Mm-hmm.
and we've all like done stupid stuff and got hurt and stuff. But like, you're the kind of guy, it's like, you just got to go on with it. You know, there's no reason to complain or anything. And give me some ibuprofen and I'll be ready to go.
Well, when I tore my ACL, I walked it off.
Yeah.
It took me a year to go get it checked out.
Yeah.
When after a year, when it finally hadn't healed up. And then I was like, well, maybe there's something, there really is something like permanently wrong that I need to get fixed here, you know, because I just put up with it, you know. But yeah, so, I mean, I was really hurting. And that Friday afternoon, you know, before I ever ended up in the hospital, like I'm going through that Friday just suffering. And there was 3 times that day that I broke down in tears over the pain, you know, or if not entirely out of the pain and desperation, asking God to help because nothing else was working. You know, the medicine wasn't working. What the doctors told me to do wasn't working. And I'm still suffering. And, you know, so I'm just crying, you know, but in the course of that, like that Friday evening, you know, it was the 4th of July. Friday evening was the 4th of July. Mm-hmm. And so the neighborhood around where my in-laws live, when it's the 4th of July, you don't need to go to a fireworks show.
Yeah.
The neighborhood around them, I'm not talking about everybody goes out in the street and throws out sparklers. I'm talking about everybody in the neighborhood has so many big professional style fireworks. You look in any direction and I'm not talking about, you know, one goes off and then 3 minutes later another one goes off and then 3 minutes later another. I'm talking boom, 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 boom. It's all the way around. You just look in any direction and you're gonna see fireworks, and you're not waiting for the next one. They're just coming.
Yeah.
And so my wife and my mother-in-law and Chloe are all outside. Zane had, you know, gone off to an actual like event with Brent and Shavonda. And so Chloe, my little girl, was outside watching fireworks, and she runs inside to tell me, because I'm inside suffering, you know, and I don't feel good enough to stand outside, you know, watching fireworks. And so I'm just, you know, kind of laid out on the couch. But Chloe was so excited about the fireworks, and she realized I wasn't out there seeing them. So she runs inside. She's like, Daddy, you got to see these fireworks. I'm like, baby, Daddy doesn't feel good. She's like, no, Daddy, you got to see them. There's, you know, and so for her sake, you know, I forced myself up. Yeah. I went outside. I watched with her for, you know, like 5 minutes, you know, sat out on the edge of the porch and watched with her, and, you know, tried my best to, you know, savor a moment with her, you know, as best as I could, and, you know, like have a memory there or whatever. But then like I was suffering bad enough, like after a few minutes of it, I, you know, gave her a hug, and I told her, I was like, okay, baby, Daddy's got to go back inside now. She's like, okay. And she stays out there watching for maybe 5 minutes, if that. And, you know, she comes back inside, and I'm like, are the fireworks all done? She's like, no. I was like, well, why aren't you watching the fireworks? She's like, I want to come in and be with you. And she just comes over and just sits up against me on the couch and just lays over on me and just kind of cuddles up with me and just starts telling me, Daddy, it's going to be okay.
Oh my goodness.
And so then there's time number 3 of when the tears just come streaming down. And I'm just, that one was the one where it wasn't just pain. That one was love and
some comfort.
Well, gratefulness that broke its way through the pain. Because I'd spent the whole day feeling sorry for myself. I spent the whole day in misery and misery, and just, just feeling bad for myself about my situation, which I had a right to feel bad about my situation. It was a bad situation. I was hurting, in a bad way, but the Lord used her there to break me out of the sorrow of it,
Mm-hmm.
and allowed me to feel grateful again, even in the midst of that, and I just started praying there while I was, cuddling with my little girl, and she was loving on me. She's trying to make me feel better.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew good and well she wanted to be outside. She wanted to be watching those fireworks, but she knew Daddy didn't feel good. So she was sacrificing that and putting away what she wanted so that she could come in and try to make Daddy feel better and comfort me.
Yeah.
And
love of the child.
And through that, I felt the love of God. Like God was loving on me by allowing her to be there to comfort me, and I just started thanking him, like, Lord, I know I'm hurting right now, but I've got so much. God's given me so much to be thankful for. And I even thanked the Lord. I was like, God, if all this pain, if this whole thing that I've been going through with my ear and all the suffering I've gone through this week, and especially today, has all been so that I would have a better appreciation of this moment right here, so that I could be grateful for what you've given me in this little girl and her brother and her sister and my wife and all of this. And even if it's just so that I had to feel all this pain so that I could also feel this comfort, thank you for it. 'Cause,
Wow.
I mean, and I'm not saying any of that to be pretentious after the fact. Like, that's genuinely how I felt in the moment, that I felt so blessed to feel and receive that comfort and love from her, which I knew was ultimately from the Lord, that God was loving me and comforting me through her. And like, if I had to feel all this pain, and we sing the song, If It Takes a Valley,
Mm-hmm.
But in that moment, I felt like I was actually experiencing that. Like, I felt this pain so that I could remember you're my comforter, and I've experienced all the sorrow that I've experienced today so that I could remember what I have to be grateful for and be comforted by what to me is legitimately a blessing from God. I mean, the Lord gave us that little girl.
Oh yeah.
I don't know if everybody that listens, I'm sure not everybody that listens to this podcast knows the testimony. We dealt with infertility for over 5 years before the Lord gave us Chloe. And that was a prophesied miracle. And we know it was God that
Right.
worked it out and allowed us to have her. So here's this little gift from God cuddling up to comfort me in my time of pain, to remind us that, or at least to remind me, that when we go through things that aren't fair, that aren't right, and when nothing's working and all it is pain, and I'm just consumed by the things that are wrong, remember everything that's right and remember who gave it to you.
Mm.
And I don't want to get preachy and tell, if you've been going through something for a long time and it's not getting any better, just look on the bright side.
Yeah.
I mean, it feels like an empty platitude, but in that moment for me, there was nothing empty about it, and it was not a platitude. Like, I genuinely felt in that moment gratitude for what God had given me despite what I was going through, and so I want to thank God at the very least just for that, because I meant that what I said, that if I had to go through all of that in order to feel that comfort and that reminder of what I have to be grateful for, I'm thankful for what the Lord allowed me to go through.
Yeah.
And I'll stand by that even now. But then things did go from there to even got worse. Because like I said, we ended up in the hospital later that night, wee hours of the morning. But then through Saturday, I told you the hydrocodone barely did anything, made me sick as a dog. I completely lost my appetite. I could barely sip down like even any Powerade or anything like that. Just got maybe like an inch down on a Powerade, trying to sip some of that down in just tiny little sips at a time, just to try and not get too dehydrated since I wasn't taking anything in, but just sick as a dog and just still hurting real bad. And so we got to the evening and I was finally hurting bad enough after that first dose of hydrocodone had wore off from that morning. Like at first I was trying to power through, trying to power through so that I wouldn't get sick again. Cause at first I'm like, if it's going to make me this sick, it's not worth it. I'll just deal with it.
Mm-hmm.
But then once the pain did come all the way back, it's like, I can't deal with it.
Yeah.
So, okay, I'll go ahead and take something. And I also need to take my evening dose of the antibiotic. So went into the kitchen and like before I even tried taking the pills, just took like a small drink of water, just kind of get my mouth wet before I tried taking the pills. And just that small drink of water just, set everything off. I couldn't hold it down. And so I told my wife at that point, I'm like, I'm still sick as a dog, still in horrible pain. The medicine's barely doing anything. I can't even get water down to even try to take the pills. There's no sense in trying to put this off. I just need to go back to the hospital. Worst they can do is look at me and say, no, we already sent you home. Go back home. So let's go. And so she takes me back to the hospital. Thankfully, and I say thankfully, genuinely, I thank the Lord that he was. The same doctor that had seen me that morning was still there that evening. And he had seen the condition I was in when I got there the first time. And to give you some context for I say I was really in pain. I say it was like a level 9.5. To kind of describe what I looked like, I was having physical convulsions that I couldn't even control. I'd started hyperventilating from it, and like to the point where like my lips and hands were getting numb, and I would have to force myself to take deep breaths, and like I was having convulsions in my leg involuntarily. I wasn't just like kicking my leg because I hurt.
Yeah.
Like you stub your toe and you like stomp the floor,
Yeah.
It wasn't like that. It was like I was sitting in the chair and like my leg is, just uncontrollably doing its own thing because as my body's reacting to the pain I was in. And so the doctor had seen that morning, and then I come back that evening and I'm in as bad of condition as I was when I got there the first time. And I told him, as I was walking into the room, he was walking into the room. I said, I'm back again, doc. And he said, I see that. I was like, I told her that the worst you can do is send us back home. He says, oh no, absolutely not. He said, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. We're going to figure out what's really wrong with you this time. He's like, because this does not seem to me to be an ear infection.
Wow.
He said, so we're going to get labs, we're going to get a CT scan, and we're going to try and figure out what's actually wrong with you. And he was great. To his credit, he really did try to figure out what was wrong with me. Can't say that about the doctors at the main campus once they admitted me, but he really did. So they got me all settled in, got me hooked up to an IV and all that stuff, took me down, had a CT scan done, drew blood for lab work and all that stuff, got me on, pain medication and stuff to get it under control. And then, after all the scans and the blood work and everything, he came in to say that they were going to admit me so they could try to figure out what was going on. Because he told me, he said, people hurt when they have ear infections. They don't hurt the way you're hurting. He said, it is not, a normal symptom of an ear infection to have the level of pain that you're dealing with. And also the fact I've been on antibiotics at this point almost a week, and I'm getting worse, not better, so he's like, this does not present to me as a normal ear infection. We need to figure out what's wrong with you. He said, but the problem is here in Broken Arrow, we don't have an MRI and we don't have an ear, nose, and throat doc on staff. He said, they have both of those in Tulsa at the main campus of the hospital. So we're going to have to send you to Tulsa. Only problem is Tulsa doesn't have any beds until tomorrow morning. So you're going to have to spend the night here. We'll send you over there in the morning. Just did pain management through the night, basically, which barely slept. Because like with being on the pain medication and stuff, like I would start to drift off to sleep. And every time I would start to drift off to sleep, my breathing would get slow enough. Mm-hmm. My oxygen level would drop enough to where the alarm thing started going off, and it'd wake me up. I had to take a few deep breaths, and it would stop. Which the nurses told me, they're like, "Oh no, it's just the thing gets loose on your finger or whatever, so you got to adjust it or whatever. It's just touchy." I'm like, I'm pretty sure my oxygen's actually dropping every time I fall asleep. And they're like, no, it's just the equipment. But like, I tested it. Like I would wake up, it wouldn't stop beeping until I started taking deep breaths, even though I hadn't moved. But if I took deep breaths, it would stop beeping. Then I drift off to sleep again. It'd start beeping again, wake me back up. So there was no sleeping going on.
Yeah, the horror of a hospital.
And my poor wife, as it gets, later, it's probably at this point like 11. I'm absolutely guessing, but if I was to guess, it's like 10, 11 o'clock. A nurse comes in and tells my wife, says, they're not going to be moving him anywhere until at least 7 a.m. if you want to go home and actually get some sleep. And I piped in and said, I'm not going to argue with that. My wife's like, no, I'm good. And like, they didn't have, thinking like a room that you've been admitted to where they got like the nice chair that reclines. I say nice, they're never comfortable, but like the chair that reclines, or like the love seat that kind of turns into a cot type situation or whatever. Nothing like that. They had 2 like waiting room chairs with armrests in that room. And she just like finagled them and angled them to where she could like lay across them and like bridged across from one chair to the other and tried to sleep that way because she refused to leave. One person told me I forever lost the argument whenever we argue about, no, I love you more. No, I love you more. Like, no, she won that night. You never get to argue with her again. But I do anyway. But because it only made me love her more. Go through all that night. They shipped me off to Tulsa at like 10 o'clock the next morning. Get there. Regina, goes to check on the kids, feed the baby and stuff like that before she meets me over at Tulsa. So she's going to be, a half hour behind me getting over there. I get, as settled in as you can in a situation like that, into the room at the new hospital. Doctor comes in, wakes me up. She basically tells me, says, we're probably going to send you home with prescription for antibiotics. We really don't keep people in the hospital for ear infections, and like, I wish I'd been more awake, because 1, I just woke up. 2, I still probably have a bunch of pain medication in my system. I'm super groggy. I didn't sleep all night long. And like, in the moment, all I could respond was just like, okay. But then when I woke up later, after I'd slept a little bit more, I woke up and I'm like, no, she basically just blew me off, came in and said that I'm a waste of her time and that she's going to send me home. Like, I'm not here for a normal ear infection,
right?
And that's the only time I ever laid eyes on that doctor. She never, did anything except for come in, basically tell me that, walk out. I mean, she didn't check my ear out or anything like that. She never even like came around to the side of my head to look at my ear, let alone get one of those scopes and look inside or anything like that. Yeah. Did no kind of physical exam at all. So that's why I say, can't necessarily say the same about the doctors in Tulsa. The guy at the emergency room in Broken Arrow, rock star. The doctors I had in Tulsa, no. So we're not doing this interview in order to bash a hospital, but I will say, if you live in the Tulsa area, don't go to Ascension St. John if you care about your health. That's my own personal opinion and my own personal testimony. You can't sue me over my opinion.
Yeah, for real.
But so
hope you left him a bad Yelp.
Yeah, but Regina, yeah. Oh man, they sent me a survey and I didn't pull any punches. I told them everything that happened, and it wasn't one of those, oh, it was the worst experience ever. The food was horrible, but like you see those generic, like bad reviews you see on a hotel that it really is just they didn't like the attitude of the receptionist, and so everything else was horrible from then on. Like I legitimately just laid out, the series of events and who did do what and who didn't do what. And I got a phone call the next day from one of the managers at that hospital, man.
It was a hotel.
It wasn't much better than one as far as I was concerned.
The bed was probably a lot less comfortable too.
Like a Motel 6.
From what I could tell, a hotel probably had more doctors than this place had. But so Regina, ended up getting there, and they take me down for an MRI. They do the MRI, which I didn't think I was going to be claustrophobic in it. I've had an MRI before, like when I had my knee, but my face didn't go in it. But for this one, they put me in head first. And for a split second, I made the mistake of opening my eyes, and I saw just how close to my face that chunk of plastic was.
Yeah.
And panic started to set in, man. But then, thank the Lord, they actually had to pull me back out to make an adjustment on something. And so I was able to get out, look up at the actual ceiling, and then this time when they pushed me back into the MRI, actually keep my eyes closed and not look up anymore, and I was okay as long as I kept my eyes closed. But I get back upstairs from the MRI, and I've got all kinds of buildup in my throat just from sleeping bad and on my back and being in a hospital and stuff. And so I walk into the bathroom to try and, spit some of that into the sink. And when I go to try to spit into the sink, I couldn't spit. And I'm not trying to sound nasty, but it just kind of dribbled out of my mouth. And I'm like, that's not right. It's like my lips were not numb, but kind of paralyzed, kind of the way they are when you get home from the dentist if you had a filling or something like that. And you still got the Novocaine to where when you smile, it crooked and one side doesn't go up, It's like I realized my lips aren't doing when like I tried to pucker my lips, I couldn't do it. Tried to spit again, couldn't do it. So I step back out, and as soon as the nurse comes back in the room, I tell him like, I tried to spit a minute ago and I couldn't. My lips aren't working. Like my lips are paralyzed. And she's like, huh, okay. And she's like, it might be like pressure pressing on your nerve or something from where your ear's infected. It might just be the swelling in there is causing pressure on your nerve. And I'm like, okay, but my lips don't like this. This is serious. Like you don't seem like you feel like this is serious. But she tells the doctor agrees it's probably just swelling pressing on the nerve. And like in hindsight, I wish I'd have had like the sense of mind to argue about that and be like, I've never heard of that from an ear infection. Have you ever seen somebody's face stop working or their, any like their lips stop working because of an ear infection? Have you ever heard of that? And like I mentioned that to our pediatrician yesterday. Macy had her 9-month appointment yesterday, and we were telling some of this story to her because, she was just asking how our summer went. And so it came up that I had Ramsay Hunt syndrome and, told her this part of it, that they thought it was just the ear infection causing pressure. And I told her, I was like, in hindsight, I wish I'd have fought back and said, have you ever even heard of that? And she goes, yeah, because I've never heard of that. She's like, that's not a thing.
Oh, my word.
So the pediatrician's like, no. A doctor told me that is not a thing. But everybody that was at the hospital was just
Must
like,
be a thing in Oklahoma then.
Maybe Oklahoma people's ear infections are different than Ohio people's ear infections. I don't know. But they just acted like it's no big deal that my face is stopping working. And like they had me smile for them, and like my smile was crooked, and so like I'm thinking this is a huge deal, and they're just like, eh. But even before that, like an hour or two, I say an hour or two, it may have been 2 or 3 hours, I don't know. Before my lips stopped working, Regina got a phone call from the ER doctor, the guy that I said was a rock star. He calls her from his house, and he said, hey, I got home from my shift, and I was still thinking about you guys. And I wonder if he might have shingles in his ear. And like, I think, well, that might be a great thought that he might
start, right?
He might be onto something because shingles, one, is a virus. It's not bacterial. So antibiotics are never going to do anything to it. And so that might explain why I'm getting worse, not better. And also I had all kinds of swelling, like on the outside of my ear. Like it was, and it was even worse on Sunday than it had been on Saturday. It was just huge, red, swollen, nasty looking. And so when we got that phone call, we asked the nurse, said, does this look like it might be shingles? And she said, well, it doesn't really look like shingles to me because it doesn't have like the big pussy blisters on it. She's like, but I'll mention it to the doctor. She goes to that doctor, the same one that basically blew me off, tells her, says, and that doctor responds, I think that ER doctor's just excited that he thinks he's solved something. Just blows it off. Like, no.
Disrespectful.
Like, no, I don't think it's that. I think he's just excited about something, like, and still never even came in and looked at it, never came in and done any kind of examination, just blew it off. And I didn't know this yet because I hadn't Googled it, but you know what the telltale sign that confirms that your ear infection is not a normal ear infection and it's actually shingles in your ear? When you start losing use of your face.
Oh, my word.
Yeah. And so I didn't know that because I hadn't Googled the symptoms or anything. I'd never even heard of anybody having shingles in their ear. I didn't know it was a thing.
I didn't know you could get shingles in your ear.
Yeah. I didn't either.
Have you had chicken pox before?
When I was a kid, I was like 4 or 5.
Okay.
I had chicken pox.
The reason why I asked that is I've heard if you've had chicken pox, you're more likely to get shingles. But that's what I was asking.
Well, you have to have chicken pox in order to get shingles because it's the same virus. You get chicken pox, and then once you get better from chicken pox, the virus stays in your system.
It's like
forever.
Dormant. It's like dormant.
Yeah,
right?
it goes dormant, but it stays there. And then when it flares up later and comes out of dormancy, it comes back as shingles.
Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
That's wild, man.
Yeah. And so they're just like blowing it off. And so since I haven't Googled it, I still don't know what's wrong with me. They're acting like they're sure it's not shingles. I'm, panicking because my face isn't working the way it should. They're acting like it's no big deal, so I'm just like all tore up, like, what is going on with me? And so then Sunday night, kind of, at some point in the middle of the night, I don't know when it was, because like they come in several times a night, either checking blood pressure or, you know, jabbing you for a blood draw or whatever. At some point in the night, the night shift nurse, not the same one that I had talked to earlier in the day, the night shift nurse comes in, and she knows about, you know, the paralysis on my mouth and stuff. And at that point, I thought it was still just in my mouth, and or like just my lips or whatever. But she comes over to the bed and she wakes me up. She's like, "Can you smile for me?" So I smile at her, and I imagine it had to been just like the straight, you know, two-face, like looks like I've got Bell palsy type of situation. And so she
Stroke
goes,
victim.
like I smiled at her, and she says, "Okay." And she immediately rushes out of the room and immediately comes back with text. Like, I don't know how many people actually came back in with her, but it wasn't just her. They come in. Next thing I know, I'm getting loaded on a gurney, and they're handing me this big straw and saying, "Here, if you start to choke, put this in your mouth so you don't aspirate." And then they're wheeling me down. They're like, "Okay, we're taking you down for another CT scan." And I'm in the middle of the night out of nowhere just because I smiled at you and you didn't like, you know, and so I'm like, what in the world is going on with me? Turns out they were afraid I might be having a stroke, and they're taking me down to the CT scan to rule that out, make sure I'm not having a stroke. But to me, I just got woke up in the middle of the night, got handed a straw saying, "Here, put this in your mouth if you start to choke so you don't aspirate to death, and we're taking you down for a CT scan right now." And so,
wow,
I'm like, what in the world is going on? And like, they're wheeling me back up from the CT scan. And during all this, I'm thinking to myself, you know, when I get back up to the room, do I need to get Regina to take a video of me telling the kids I love them? You know, I like, what's wrong with me? What's going on? I had no idea. You know, those are the kinds of thoughts I was having at that point. But they do the CT scan. They don't see a stroke on it, but they don't explain anything to me. They just do the CT scan and then start wheeling me back upstairs. They don't tell me, "Yeah, CT scan looks good. You're not having a stroke. Nothing to be scared about." They just wheel me upstairs without telling me anything, get me back on my bed, and then they take the straw thing back away from me, and just everybody leaves. And just as quick as that, I'm back by myself, just me and Regina alone by ourselves in the room. And I just looked at her like, "Babe, I'm scared," you know, because I didn't know what was going on, you know. And so eventually got back to sleep, wake up the next morning to a new doctor that came in. I guess the lady I had talked to on Sunday was just filling in for the weekend. Like, it wasn't her normal floor or whatever. So I guess the guy who's normally on that floor or in charge of it is there Monday through Friday or something. So meet him for the first time Monday morning. He starts giving me all these assurances. "Don't worry, we're not going to send you home until you're feeling better." I'm like, "Okay, doc, but my face worked yesterday. My face doesn't work today." And he's like, "Yeah, but don't worry, we've got you on good antibiotics. We're gonna get this infection taken care of." I'm like, "But my face doesn't work, doc. When I got here, my face worked. I'm getting worse with with weird stuff." And he's like, "Yeah, but we've got you under control. We've got you on antibiotics." And I told him, I said, "Doc, I've been on antibiotics almost a week." And he goes, "Yeah, but these are IV antibiotics. They're really good. So let's give them 48 hours. And that was it. And he leaves the room. And I'm like, this guy's as useless as the lady I talked to yesterday. You know, just no interest in trying to figure out what's actually going on with me. Just don't worry, we're going to keep trying the same thing that hasn't been working.
Must went to the same school. They're just passing out PhDs.
Yeah.
Well, I think the term that you're looking for is insanity, which is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. And I think at this point, that hospital is insane. You haven't seen me.
Thank you for not saying it was the definition of insanity. It is a symptom of insanity. And I'm pedantic enough that when people say, well, the definition of insanity, no, that is not the definition. It's an example.
But like you haven't seen me because you haven't been. But during parts of your story, I'm literally flabbergasted, dumbfounded, and like in shock and awe at how incompetent they seem to be at this hospital in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Like I said, I'm sorry. Yeah. I just had to get that out there because I think this is insanity.
I had a nurse tell me I should sue him, but I'll tell you this. I mean, I'm telling all these details, which I didn't know if I was going to tell all these. When you asked if I could tell this story, I didn't know if I was going to, give the hospital drama or not. Because to me, that's not the important part. It's not at all. the important part of.
I still don't even know what you had.
Oh, he mentioned it.
Yeah.
It's shingles, right? Or what? It was this, what syndrome was it called?
Ramsey Hunt syndrome.
Okay.
is the official term for what I had, which is a case of shingles in your ear, and then the shingles attack the nerve that runs through your ear, which is your facial nerve that controls the whole side of your face.
Okay, so that's okay.
Yeah, but finally saw the door open up and saw a guy in green scrubs with the hat on that the doctors wear that the nurses don't. And as soon as he walked in, it was a doctor I didn't recognize, and he was in scrubs. I'm like, oh, thank the Lord, there's finally an ear, nose, and throat here. He walks in, introduces himself. It is the ear, nose, and throat. And within 2 minutes, I described my symptoms to him, told him I've been hurting for a week, been getting worse, not better with antibiotics. The pain is like a 9.5. When I'm not on pain medicine, it's been horrible. And then yesterday, my face stopped working on the left side of my face. And he looks over at the other doctor that walked in with him. I guess like he had an associate or whatever, and looks over at him and goes, "Sounds like Ramsey Hunt to me." And like just that quick. I mean, 2-3 minutes of me telling him what was going on with me. He didn't even have to look at me. He's like, "You got Ramsey Hunt syndrome." And he does come over and, he sits down next to me and starts describing, what treatment's going to be like and stuff like that. So that was what it was. They finally got me diagnosed that it's Ramsey Hunt syndrome, which is shingles in your ear. And shingles, the way they work, they tend to run along nerve lines. And so, like I said earlier, there's that facial nerve that controls that whole side of your face, runs through your ear. And so it presses down, squeezes, compresses on that nerve until that nerve gets cut off. And so it's like,
wow.
The reason it started in my lips and then through to the rest of my face was as that nerve, the larger nerve was getting cut off, the different parts that run through there were getting cut off one by one. And it just, for me, it started in my lips. I don't know if that's how it starts for everybody. That's where it started for me. Funnily enough, that's one of the parts that still doesn't work. So maybe it's like a first out, last back kind of a situation. Yeah. I don't know. Like Tuesday, when I was feeling like the pain was gone, I felt like I could, actually look at my phone and stuff. That's when I started checking text messages, and I went on Facebook and stuff to see if I had any messages there, stuff like that, just because I knew people knew I was in the hospital, and I knew, just knowing, because I'd heard from, some church folks, or like Regina had told me, hey, so-and-so said they're praying for you, stuff like that. So I knew I probably had messages to check. But then when I saw how many messages I had, man, I was sitting on the hospital bed, and it was just me and Regina in the room at that point, and going through, and I'm reading my text messages from this one that says, hey, I'm praying for you. This one says, hey, I'm praying for you. And stuff like, and just reading what they're saying about how they're praying for me. And I go on Facebook to check there, and I see that I'm tagged over and over and over and over again as this one shares, hey, pray for Brother Carlos. This one shares, hey, pray for Brother Carlos. This one's sharing it. And all the comments from everybody saying they're praying for me, and all the messages that I had. And like, I see how many people are touching heaven on my behalf. And like, cause I mean, up to that point, my experience that whole weekend has been, I've got doctors that aren't checking on me. I've got nurses that are acting like everything that's happening is no big deal. Or if they're not acting like nothing's a big deal, I'm being whisked away with no explanation for emergency CT scans that I don't know what's going on. Like, that's the condition I've been in this whole weekend, is that everybody that should be taking care of me is just kind of ignoring me. But then Tuesday, I start looking at my phone and I see this one's praying for me. This one wants me to know they're praying for me. This one's praying for me. This one's praying for me. And like, I just broke down, and just tears are, I'm just bawling. And I'm thanking God all over again. I told you about how I was thanking the Lord about, when Chloe was comforting me there on the couch. I felt like I was in that place again. Not that this time it was my little girl cuddled up next to me, but this time it was so many people of God,
the body of Christ,
reaching out to me to let me know, I'm fighting for you. I'm praying for you. I'm going to the throne for you. I'm praying for you. And just knowing there were that many people that legitimately cared enough, not to just, oh, Lord, help Brother Carlos. I heard he needs prayer. But that actually cared enough that they not only were praying for me, but were reaching out to encourage me by letting me know that they were praying for me.
Mm-hmm.
And like, I've been in situations where I wanted people to pray for me, and like, it's like when I went in for my knee surgery, I really wanted people to pray that went well. And I wanted people to pray that I had a good recovery from that and stuff like anybody would. But as far as being in that kind of a scary place where I don't know what's going on with me, I don't know if my life is going to be the same from now on. I don't know if I'm going to recover from this, and like, I'm having thoughts to myself and, when I find out it's Ramsey Hunt and they tell me there's a 30% chance your face doesn't heal up and stuff like that, I'm scared, like, is there going to be a day that, I walk my little girl down the aisle and I can't smile for the pictures? Mm-hmm. I'm having those kind of thoughts, but then God comes by to comfort me again. This time it's not through my little girl. This time it's through his people that have let me know I'm praying for you, and so I'm just bawling, and Regina looks over at me. She's like, are you okay? I'm like, yeah, I'm fine.
Yeah.
People are praying for me, And so she comes over and she's sitting with me and she's looking at my phone with me, and she starts to comfort me, and all that. But just the comfort that I didn't realize was going to come from knowing people were going to God in prayer for me, like, it hit me in a way that I didn't realize. So I feel like I learned in that moment, not the value of prayer. I understand the value and the power of prayer, but I feel like I learned in that moment what it means to the person being prayed for, to know that somebody else is intervening for you, and so, like, not to say that I didn't pray for people already, but like, I've determined in myself since then, from now on, when I see somebody needs prayer, God help me not to just, oh, well, Lord help them, and then just move on with my life, or just, how many people do you think out there that actually comment and say, oh, we're praying on Facebook, because they say a prayer request on Facebook and they comment and say, oh, I'm praying. Do they really get down and pray?
Yeah.
Like, I'm not saying that nobody does, but I'm sure there's plenty of us have been guilty, because I'm sure I've been guilty. Like, I'll be praying for you, and then did I forget, or did I remember? Did I actually get down on my knees and go to battle for that person?
Yeah, it gives you a greater fervency.
Yeah,
prayer.
and knowing what that means to a person. I've prayed and asked me, Lord, help me to, when somebody else needs me to pray for them, don't let me fall. Don't let me fail to pray for them, because there were so many people that didn't fail to pray for me. Like, I want to make sure that I step up for the ones that need me to pray, But so I like I said, I just felt in that moment again, Lord, you've brought me into this trial, but here you are comforting me again so that I can feel grateful again, even now that the trial has gotten worse. You've come by and you've comforted me again, so that I can, again, even in the middle of this, now that it's gotten worse, feel grateful again.
Yeah.
And so while Regina was there, I told you, she came over and sat down next to me on the hospital bed and was kind of comforting me, like rubbing my shoulders and stuff. And I told her through the tears, I said, I know what I'm going to preach the first time I preach again. Because like in that moment, when I talking to her at that point, I don't know how long I'm going to be in the hospital. I don't know, how long I'm going to feel as miserable as I do. I don't know how long it's going to be before I'm able to preach again. But I knew in that moment, I knew what I was going to preach. And I told her, I said, I know what I'm going to preach the first time I preach. I'm going to preach and I'm going to tell them God's good. And which I did, but the first, it was a Wednesday evening, the first time I felt strong enough to get up behind the pulpit, and that I wasn't going to get too dizzy from vertigo and fall down or something like that, that I knew, I'm pretty sure I'll be able to stand up and do this. I did. I got up and I told them through it all, God is good, and cause he is. And so, they wheel me down. My brother-in-law drove me home, but while I was waiting in the waiting room, the guy that was, kind of the Walmart greeter, so to speak, or whatever, that was kind of manning the door, standing behind the podium. He asked me what I'd been in for, and I told him that I had shingles in my ear and that had, attacked the nerve on my face and all that. And he said, well, God love you. And I just broke down crying again. I told him, I said, that's the thing, man. He does. He does.
Yeah.
And, so then he comes over and he puts an arm around me and he starts talking to me, and he tells me what church he goes to. And he goes, have you heard it? The Bible app on your phone? And I was like, yeah. He goes, our church is the one that made that app, the U version one that has all the users on it where you can, share verses with people and all that and highlight stuff, He's like, yeah. And he tells me how many downloads it has. And then we ended up just having a church conversation. But well, God love you. I told him, I said, he does.
Yeah.
That's the thing. He does. I may not look like somebody who should be too sure of it right now, but I'm as sure of it right now as I've ever been in my entire life that God loves me. But so got to my in-laws that morning, and my wife told me, she said, hey, Stevie, that's my brother-in-law, her brother, and he lives there local to my in-laws, and he goes to Brother John Brock's church there in Kellyville. She said, Stevie's calling a bunch of preachers, and they're going to come by the house about 6:00 to pray for you before they go to their Wednesday night services. I was like, all right. And so I tried my best to get cleaned up, because at this point, it's been way longer than a person ought to go without a shower. And,
Yeah.
I hadn't shaved. I looked gross and all this stuff. So do my best to get cleaned up and stuff. But they roll in. Their plan is they're going to pray for me at 6:00 Oklahoma time. Sharonville canceled regular service to have a prayer service to start at 7:00 so that they can pray for me and a few other people that they had needs that they were praying about. And my own church there at Bethel Chapel, they're going to have special prayer for me starting at 7:00 Ohio time. So there's a time difference, but everybody's going to be praying at the same time.
Yeah.
And so several preachers start rolling in. Brother John Brock came, Brother Ronnie Baker, Brother Randy Perry, and others. I don't want to try and necessarily name everybody, but just several came in, and men that I've got confidence in, and they gathered around me and started praying. And Brother Sean, when I tell you the Holy Ghost came in the room, I mean the Holy Ghost came in the room, and God showed up, and I don't say this as like I could feel the Spirit of the Lord there in the room. I tell you, God touched me while they were praying for me. And I told you how miserable I was with the vertigo. I mean, it was constant. Even when I was sitting still, eyes open, eyes closed, doesn't matter. I was in a constant state of spinning and car sickness. It was awful.
Mm-hmm.
And while they were praying, and I felt the Lord touch me while they were praying for me, and that left instantly. I mean, I felt the Lord touch me. I lifted up my head. I opened up my eyes, and I looked around the room, and it was not spinning. I did not feel car sick anymore or motion sick or whatever. And all that misery was gone in an instant when I felt the Lord touch me there while they were praying for me. And I went ahead, and at that point, like, I stood up to see, is it totally gone? And like, am I even able to walk around? Because I mean, I'd had to like hold onto walls or hold hands with somebody in order to like, walk down the hall or whatever, or across the room or anything, just because it had been that bad. Once I got up and started walking around, I didn't have my balance back yet, so I did kind of still wobble when I walked, but that misery was gone.
Wow.
And it never came back. And when I felt the Lord touch me, I really felt this way. And I testified to him when they got done praying for me. And I told him, I said, I really feel like when the Lord touched me, he touched me as a testimony to show me like this was earnest money that God was putting down, that he's going to finish the work and he's going to give me a full recovery. And I stand by that now.
Yeah.
It's 2 months later and I'm still recovering, and there's still things that don't work right. And I still have that double vision on my left side. Not necessarily to you. I only see one of you, so it's gotten better. But like if something is, 10, 15 feet away and I'm having to look across the bridge of my nose, it's still double vision. So I'm still healing from that. I'm still recovering from that. My left eye still doesn't blink when my right eye blinks. I have to actually think about it and force my eye to close to keep my eye from drying out. I told you my lips still don't work right, stuff like that. I mean, I can smile because my cheeks work, but my lips themselves still don't work right. So I'm still recovering. So you say, well, but I know.
Yeah.
I know what I felt from God in that moment when the Holy Ghost was in the room, when men and women were praying for me and God touched me and I knew God touched me. I know what I felt from God in that moment was that he was showing me that he would heal me completely. Not then, but that he would. And what I told them was, I feel like the man that God led out of town.
Yeah.
And when he led him out of town, he anointed his eyes and he said, I see men as trees walking. In other words, I've been touched. I am better. I'm improved from what I was, but the work's not done yet. And then the Lord anointed him the second time, touched him again. When Christ touched him again, then he was made whole. And I'm still waiting to be totally whole, but the Lord's brought me all that way. And like I want to say it was like over 2 weeks of my face still didn't do anything, even 2 weeks after treatment. And I was praying one night. I was home alone. I don't remember if Regina, where she had taken the kids. She might've like taken them to her sister's house or something just to hang out with them or something. And so I had the house to myself and I walked into our half bath downstairs and I leaned over the sink. I looked in the mirror and I saw, just my face still didn't, like I tried to smile and it still didn't work. But I looked in the mirror at the condition I was in and I started to pray and I said, Lord, I know what you did. I know what you told me. And I know you're going to make me whole. I know you're going to give me a recovery. And I kid you not, I said those words and I tried. And as soon as I said them, I looked in the mirror again and I tried to raise my eyebrow up and it didn't go up, but I just like the smallest little quiver.
Wow.
In my eyebrow. Like it twitched. I tried to raise it up and it twitched side to side just a little bit. Like the way your eyelid would twitch if you didn't get enough sleep last night. Like it was that faint of a little twitch, but I could see it in the mirror. And so I tried to do it again and it twitched again and I tried it again and it twitched again. And I just started yelling, thank you, Jesus, thank you. And like I just start walking laps around my house just with my hands up in the air and hollering at the top of my lungs, thank you, Jesus, just because of that one little glimmer of hope. Mm-hmm. And like I get my phone out and I record myself, to send a video to my family. Like, look, there's a sign of life there that something happened, and like, and then we go from that to where several days later, I start getting a similar thing where it's just a tiny little twitch in my cheek when I tried to smile. Like nothing actually moved, but just like a quiver. And then like I start getting a little bit of quiver on my lower eyelid, stuff like that. And then moved from those quivers to where now stuff's starting to move to where now most things on my face actually move well enough that if you didn't know, you probably wouldn't tell there's anything wrong. Every now and then when I, pronounce a P, it kind of, my lips kind of stutter a little bit when I push that sound out or whatever. But, and if you look close, you might notice that this eye's not blinking or something like that. But, I can smile, things like that. And I can talk without it sounding like I'm in the middle of Bell's palsy, things like that. But
yeah, it's gotten, like we were talking beforehand. I remember seeing you in the beginning and I mean, it was right. You could definitely tell. I mean, the damage that it had done, but guys, I'm not even kidding. Within a week of each other, we have seen each other at a funeral. And then the next week I went to his church for revival and there was a tremendous amount of healing that took place within that week. And I'm really looking forward to see that 100%. Like, I've told you before, I was praying about it and I felt like it was just, it didn't come to stay, it came to pass when I was praying about it, and I was like, even before we had talked about it, we set aside that prayer meeting and that Brother Ryan had made special for you. And like, I felt right then that's that's what the word was going to do, is that it was going to pass.
Yeah. And there's still been times like during this, especially like now that it's since the time when everything kind of started getting a lot faster, like since that week, like in that week is like, oh man, I'm getting so much better so fast, you know?
Yeah.
And it's been, I guess, 2.5 weeks ago now. I had it was supposed to be a 1 month follow-up, but it was like 6 weeks. By the time I had this follow-up with my ear, nose, and throat doctor, it had been like 6 weeks since the diagnosis when I seen him. But he said, you've had so much progress at this point. He's like, and this is a months-long thing. He's like, it'd take, a good 6 to 12 months for nerves to heal. He said, at this point, I expect a full recovery. And so like I leave that like, thank you, Lord. The doctor agrees with what God said, and but then, a couple more weeks go by, it's at this point, some things actually are getting stronger. If I pay attention, and I'm not getting discouraged, like my smile is getting stronger. And even though this lip isn't still working, my cheeks are getting stronger enough that when I smile, it actually pulls this lower lip over enough to where my lips, my smile doesn't look as crooked as it looked a week or two ago. But like at one point, several days, maybe a week ago, I realized it's been a couple weeks since something new started moving. Like I've got all this stuff that's actually getting better, but like since something new started moving, like, the eyebrows started moving, then the cheek, and then the chin, and then, down here or whatever, or then I was able to wiggle my ear again, stuff like that. It's been a couple weeks since something like that showed up as a new thing. And I'm like, did I stop getting better? Have I stalled? Has my recovery plateaued? And then you start getting discouraged, like, well, maybe this is as good as it's going to get. Maybe you never will blink on that eye again, because some people don't. That's one of the things, in that 30% of people whose face doesn't get all the way better, one of the things that lists is, some of those people never get their blinking back, or, some of them, when they smile, it forces their eye to close, or, because something got cross-wired or whatever. So it's like, okay, am I going to be one of the ones that never blinks again? And you start having those thoughts and you start to get discouraged, but then like, no, no, I refuse that, And so like, I'm not testifying to you here on the back end of it, telling you, that God's already done it, but I'm not afraid to sit here and tell you right now, I still believe he is.
Yeah, he's going to do it.
And you mentioned earlier when we were talking about the contrast of the doctors had, in my opinion, failed me as much as they had, telling that in contrast with once I left the hospital, all the ways that God starts moving on my behalf, that as much as they failed me, God never has, never will. Wednesday, I think it was Wednesday morning. It was either Tuesday or Wednesday, sometime when I was still in the hospital. I was texting my dad and I was venting to him about, how upset I was about how the ball had been dropped and, why didn't they start the treatment sooner and stuff like that. Just kind of, I was in the middle of it at that point and like, letting him, just kind of venting to my dad about, I worry about, did we start treatment soon enough? Should we have been able to start treatment a whole day sooner and stuff like that? And, he's my dad. He didn't feel any different than I did, when I'm telling him what's going on and, how things have gone with all of this. He's as upset as I am because that's his boy, that's going through all that. But even as he and I, talked about it, even in that moment, he goes ahead and he's like, here's a scripture for you, and just texts it to me, and I don't know if it was his day. I never even asked him. I don't know if it was his daily reading that it just jumped out to him, or if it was just something the Lord quickened to him, because my dad's the kind of guy, it wouldn't surprise me if God just told him, hey, Joshua 1, 8 and 9, or whatever, but he texts me, hey, Joshua 1, 8 and 9 might be good for you today. And so I look it up. It says, this book of the law shall not depart out of thy mouth, but thou shalt meditate therein day and night, that thou mayest observe to do according to all that is written therein. For then thou shalt make thy way prosperous, and then thou shalt have good success. Have not I commanded thee, be strong and of a good courage, be not afraid, neither be thou dismayed, for the Lord thy God is with thee whithersoever thou goest. And I'm like,
Perfect.
All right. Okay. They might not be with me. They might have failed me, but God's with me.
Yeah.
Whithersoever I go, wherever I go, the Lord is with me. And that's what matters. That's what counts. That's what I need. Doesn't matter, what a doctor did or didn't do. The great physician is on my side, and that's what matters. So he texted me that, but then he also texted me, he says, Psalm 142 might be a good prayer for you to pray today. Like, because we're talking about, this whole situation and, the unfairness and all that. But he says, like, he tells me Joshua 1:8-9, be of good courage. Lord's going with you. But then he tells me, he goes, Psalm 142 might be a good prayer for you today. And not just, hey, read Psalm 142, might be a good prayer.
Wow. Yeah.
And so I pull it up. Psalm 142 says, I cried unto the Lord with my voice unto the Lord did I make my supplication. I poured out my complaint before him. I showed before him my trouble. When my spirit was overwhelmed within me, then thou knewest my path. In the way wherein I walked have they privily laid a snare for me. I looked on my right hand, and behold, but there was no man that would know me. Refuge failed me. No man cared for my soul. I cried unto thee, O Lord. I said, thou art my refuge and my portion in the land of the living. Attend unto my cry, for I am brought very low. Deliver me from my persecutors, for they are stronger than I. Bring my soul out of prison, that I may praise thy name. The righteous shall compass me about, for thou shalt deal bountifully with me. I'm like, okay. Okay, again.
Yeah, get down to the nitty gritty of it all.
Yeah. Like, when nobody else cares, God does, and that's enough. And besides that, it's not even true that nobody else cares.
Yeah.
Because I've got so many other people praying for me, and I've had multiple people reach out and not just say, hey, I'm praying for you. I've had multiple people let me know, hey, I'm praying for you. I believe God's going to give you a full recovery. And even weeks later, still have people, hey, still praying for you, and so it's kind of what I've been going through, but through it all, God's been good. He's helping me, and like, I've gotten a lot of my strength back. I feel better, even though I've got, the double vision is annoying. It's a problem. I really don't want to live with it forever. The blinking, annoying, horrible, don't want to live with it forever. But as far as like my physical being, how I feel, like I've got energy back, I've got appetite back, which, by the way, coming off the prednisone, did not have. I went through bad steroid withdrawals when they weaned me off of that stuff, but that's a whole other story.
Yeah.
But God helped me, brought me through that too. And, just the Lord's brought me a long way. And, you mentioned at the very beginning of this, I just started pastoring.
Yeah.
And then got hit with this. And so, like, one of the things I was afraid of, in the hospital and stuff is like, man, I just started pastoring these people. Now I got to go home to them, and like my face doesn't work. My voice, my speech is slurred because half my mouth doesn't work. They're going to have buyer's remorse, and all this, but excuse me, they're going to have buyer's remorse and all this, but they rallied around me. They prayed for me. And I feel like it's honestly even brought us, between me and the congregation, like it's brought us closer.
Yeah.
It's something now that we have in common, that I was there with them when I went into this trial, and part of them as they rallied around me to pray for me and with me and to help me get through it, and so, I mean, that one endears them to me for one thing.
I'll tell you what I think. Well, I got to be there a couple of services while you were facing all this, and never once did they talk about how down and out they could have been with it, or what was us, our new pastor's out, or it was, well, we got to get him better, you know, and to me, when you go into something that quickly, it just shows. It's like the devil, in a strange way, makes it an extra stamp of approval for God. Yeah. When you like move into,
like everything he does just backfires.
Yeah. It's, I did this to discourage them. It's like, no, this just proves that you were in God's will, because that opposition happened so quickly, or at least in my mind, it doesn't always work like that.
Yeah.
But
everything I've heard from them has been, hey, our pastor needs prayer.
Yes.
And I had multiple pastors, even in just like the first few weeks of the diagnosis and everything, when it was all kind of still blowing up, had multiple pastors come to me and say, hey, when God puts you in a place where you're supposed to be, the devil will always bring some kind of trial like this, especially new pastors, especially first-time pastors. And like I had multiple pastors come to me and say, hey, the first time I pastored a church, I wasn't there, but such and such a number of weeks, and this happened. I was there and had just taken the church, and then this happened. And every one of their testimonies that they told on that was the devil tried to stop what God had put them there to do, and God turned it around for good and made it a blessing in disguise. And I feel like the Lord's just doing the same thing.
Yeah.
And because I do genuinely feel like I'm in God's will as far as being there at Bethel and Richmond and being the pastor there at that church, just because I feel like I'm in the center of God's will. The devil doesn't like it. He doesn't want our church to be successful. He doesn't want our church to have revival. He doesn't want our church to be blessed. He doesn't want me to help them. He doesn't want me to be a blessing to them. But through his attack, God's just turning it around on him. Did I have to suffer the physical pain? Sure. Did I have to go through the emotional turmoil? Sure. But is God going to turn that around and work it for the good and make the devil sorry he ever messed with God's plans? I absolutely 100% believe so.
For sure.
Because that's how God works.
Yeah.
Joseph's the one that said it first, what the devil meant for, or what you meant for evil, the Lord meant for good. He didn't say it about the devil. He said it about his brothers, but they were working on the devil's behalf, sure. at that point, but it still rings true today. What the enemy means for evil, God can always work it for good.
Well, man, it's been such a pleasure to have you on the show and for you to share.
I've had a blast being here. I feel like I've been really long-winded though, but there's plenty of people that are in the same situation that may feel now, had you not caught this thing, it could have definitely been terminal. It's something that could have totally wiped you out. I had a guy at work ask me the other day, he said, man, if this had happened 50, 100 years ago, what would have happened to you? I said, well, at the very least, I'd have been permanently disfigured.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think there's a lot of people that this was a abrupt, life-changing experience that some people may just discount and say, oh, this was just a part of his life or whatever. It's like, well, it doesn't matter how severe the attack is, or.
Well, and with shingles, when they get into either your ear or especially with your eye, it can move from there into your brain because it's already inside your head. It can move up that nerve into your brain, and it gets in your brain. It can kill you.
Well, and what I was thinking is that there's a lot of people that go through significant things like this in their life that are true landmarks where God has to step in and make a difference, and you either get better or you don't. But it comes down the road, the enemy can fight us and say, oh, it wasn't really that big of a deal for God to touch you there, try to belittle the victory that was made there. So I think this is great because I'm sure there's somebody who is fighting the same kind of battle, ongoing battle, and this even translates to people who are sick chronically or have the same effects, maybe just in a longer term, So it's been awesome. Thanks for taking time to be with us. Brother Jonathan had to slip out on us here.
I went on so long telling my story that his kids started throwing a fit at home and his wife called in reinforcements.
No, but I appreciate him sticking around for what he did.
Yeah. And I appreciate the invitation, man. I really do.
Oh, man.
I've had a blast.
Anytime, dude. You can more than welcome to sit in with us. And, obviously you're local, so.
Yeah. I live 20 minutes closer to you than Jonathan does, apparently. He said 45 minutes. I'm only 25 away, so.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, if you ever need a fill-in, let me know, man.
I will for sure, man. I hope everybody enjoyed this episode. If you'd like to hear more from Brother Carlos, leave us a comment, send us a text message about it. Our email is pulpittothepew@gmail.com. And thanks for tuning in, everybody.